Humanity once lived without a single city on Earth. The blueprint of the first cities transformed everything. By the end of this, you will understand the hidden design behind modern society itself. We will uncover why ancient city builders chose specific river valleys and how they managed thousands of people without modern tools. What does it truly take to build a civilization from the ground up? The rhythm of the hunt and the gathering of wild grains had defined human existence for millennia. Then, slowly, the world began to change. Around 10,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, a profound shift took root. People started to plant seeds intentionally, cultivating wheat and barley. They began to domesticate animals like goats and sheep. This was not merely a new way to find food. It was a new way of thinking about time, place, and the future itself. Agriculture created a food surplus, meaning a community could produce more than it immediately consumed. This simple yet revolutionary idea meant that not everyone had to spend their days in the pursuit of the next meal. For the first time, societies could support individuals who specialized in other tasks. One person could become a potter, crafting sturdy vessels for storing the grain harvest. Another could become a toolmaker, fashioning sharper scythes and stronger plows. Another might focus on building more permanent homes from mud brick and timber. This is how the first proto-cities, like ancient Jericho with its famous stone wall or Catalhoyuk with its labyrinth of interconnected houses, began to emerge. These were not cities as we know them today, but they were the crucial first draft. They featured shared spaces, evidence of long-distance trade for obsidian and shells, and the beginnings of social structure. The renowned archaeologist Gordon Childer called this monumental shift the urban revolution. It was not a sudden event, but a gradual transformation that enabled everything from organized religion and governance to the flourishing of art and technology. This transition from nomadic bands to settled communities planted the very seeds of civilization. But why did these first blossoms of urban life emerge where they did? The land itself held the key, offering both incredible bounty and formidable challenges. The land did not simply provide a backdrop, it issued an invitation. And the first to accept were the communities that settled along the great river valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates, the Nile, and the Indus. These were not random choices, but strategic ones dictated by a powerful, life-giving rhythm. Every year, without fail, these rivers would overflow their banks. While destructive in the short term, this annual flooding deposited a fresh layer of incredibly fertile silt across the floodplains. This created the perfect conditions for agriculture on a scale never before possible, enabling harvests so bountiful they could sustain thousands of people in one concentrated area. But the rivers offered more than just food. They were the first highways, allowing for the movement of goods, ideas, and people with an efficiency land routes could not match. A farmer's surplus grain could be loaded onto a raft and traded downstream for timber, stone, or precious metals from distant regions. This was the birth of large-scale commerce. Yet, living alongside such powerful forces of nature also demanded ingenuity. In Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, communities learned to build their cities on great mounds of earth and rubble, artificial hills raised high enough to escape the worst of the seasonal deluges. Far to the east, in the meticulously planned cities of the Indus Valley like Mohenjo-Daro, we find one of the ancient world's most stunning innovations, a complex city-wide drainage system with covered channels running beneath the streets. This was not merely about convenience, it was a profound understanding of public health. This intimate, challenging relationship with water led some scholars, like historian Carl Wittfogel, to propose a compelling theory. He suggested that the very need to manage water, to build and maintain massive irrigation canals and flood defenses, required a new level of social organization. Someone had to plan the projects, marshal the labor, and settle disputes over water rights. This necessity, he argued, forged the world's first centralized governments and bureaucratic classes, creating what he termed a hydraulic civilization. The blueprint of the first cities was, therefore, drawn by the rivers themselves. But once the foundations were laid, human creativity began to build upwards, crafting the very first urban skyline with architectural wonders that would define city life for millennia to come. Walking through the planned streets of Mohenjo-Daro, you would have found yourself navigating a world of remarkable order. The main avenues ran straight, with smaller lanes cutting off at right angles to form city blocks, a layout that feels surprisingly modern. This was not haphazard growth, it was deliberate design. Across these early urban centers, from the Indus Valley to Mesopotamia, a new concept was being etched into the earth, the master plan. Builders used standardized, kiln-fired bricks, each one identical in dimension, allowing for the rapid construction of not just single-story homes, but multi-story buildings that changed the very scale of human habitation. These cities were zoned with clear purposes. There were compact residential districts, bustling public squares for markets and gatherings, and elevated ceremonial centers that dominated the skyline. In Mesopotamia, this was the ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid that served as both a temple and a towering symbol of the city's identity. It was a physical representation of a bridge between the earthly and the divine, a constant visual anchor for every citizen. Meanwhile, the people of the Indus Valley demonstrated a different kind of genius, one focused on the health of the community. Their cities were engineered with an advanced sanitation system that would not be rivaled for thousands of years. Homes had private bathrooms and wastewater was channeled into covered drains that ran beneath the streets, a profound innovation in public wellness. As archaeologist Jane McIntosh observes, the uniformity in brick sizes across the entire Indus Valley suggests a level of central planning previously unseen in human history. These architectural choices were far more than practical solutions. They were a physical expression of a collective vision, a blueprint for how thousands of people could live together in a coordinated, sustainable way. But such grand designs and massive infrastructure projects raised a critical question. Who was organizing all of this? Who was organizing all of this? The answer lies not in a single person, but in a revolutionary social structure that emerged from the urban experiment. As populations swelled into the thousands, the old ways of organizing society, based on kinship and informal leadership, were no longer sufficient. A new, more complex hierarchy began to take shape, a blueprint for social order that would echo for millennia. In the bustling city of Uruk, one of the largest of the ancient Sumerian cities, this new structure was vividly clear. At the heart of the city stood the great temple complex, a sprawling institution that did far more than host religious ceremonies. It acted as the city's economic hub, storing the community's surplus grain, managing vast tracts of farmland, and coordinating long-distance trade. To manage this complex economy, a new class of professionals emerged, the scribes. These individuals possessed the rare and powerful skill of writing, using cuneiform script to meticulously record everything from tax payments and business contracts to the epic myths of their gods. This was a profound shift, the birth of the administrator. For the first time, knowledge and decisions could be recorded, creating a permanent memory for the city that outlasted any single individual. This specialization of labor was the engine of urban efficiency. Not everyone had to be a farmer. One person could dedicate their life to perfecting the potter's wheel, creating vessels of such beauty and function they became valued trade goods. Another could become a metalworker, a soldier, or a priest. This division of work allowed for incredible advances in technology and culture, yet this new system came with a cost. It created clear social stratification. Those who controlled the resources, the religious and political elites, often lived in larger, more elaborate homes, enjoying privileges far beyond the reach of the common laborer. As anthropologist Marvin Harris noted, this dense urban life required new forms of social control to manage disputes and coordinate collective projects, leading to the world's first codified laws and centralized governments. These early hierarchies, while establishing inequalities, were the necessary framework that allowed cities to function and flourish. They laid the very groundwork for the class systems and professional specializations that define our modern world. But this intricate social machine needed fuel to run. What economic systems emerged to power these growing urban centers, and how did they connect the ancient world? This intricate social machine needed fuel, a constant flow of goods and services to sustain its growing population. The economic system that emerged was powered by two revolutionary forces: agricultural surplus and long-distance trade. A farmer's extra barley or a craftsman's finely woven textiles were no longer just for local use. They became valuable commodities. In Mesopotamia, merchants became the lifeblood of civilization, navigating the Tigris and Euphrates on reed boats. They established caravan routes that snaked across deserts, connecting cities and cultures in a vast, early web of commerce. They traded staple goods like grain and olive oil for luxury items, lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan, cedar wood from the Levant, and precious metals like copper and tin. This was the birth of a true market economy where value was negotiated and the concept of wealth was transformed. To manage this complex new system, another innovation proved essential: the written word. The cuneiform script pressed into clay tablets became the ancient world's first filing system. Scribes recorded debts, contracts for future deliveries, and lists of traded goods. A single tablet could detail a transaction involving 500 bushels of grain, 10 bolts of cloth, and a shipment of copper tools, creating a permanent, unchangeable record. This written proof made commerce predictable and scalable, allowing trust to extend beyond face-to-face dealings. Cities like grew immensely wealthy as central nodes in these sprawling trade networks. Their prosperity was built not just on local resources, but on their ability to connect the Mediterranean world with the Indus Valley. Economic historian Carl Polanyi noted that these early markets were not separate from society. They were deeply embedded within it. The great temple of a city often doubled as its central bank and warehouse, managing communal stores of grain and overseeing large-scale trade, all under the watchful eyes of the gods. This interconnected economy did more than just move goods. It became a powerful conduit for ideas, spreading new technologies, artistic styles, and even words across continents. The legacy of these ancient trade routes is etched into our modern global markets, but such concentrated wealth and complex interactions created new tensions. How did these early cities prevent disputes over property and trade from spiraling into chaos, and what new rules were written to maintain order? A dense urban population created new forms of conflict, from property lines to broken contracts. To manage this, the world's first written legal codes emerged, transforming abstract concepts of justice into concrete, publicly known rules. The Code of Namu from ancient Sumer is one of our earliest examples. It did not rely on the whims of a single ruler, but established standardized penalties for specific offenses, creating a predictable system for everyone from merchant to farmer. This move toward codified law was revolutionary, a declaration that order itself was a foundational pillar of the city. Rulers, often portrayed as chosen by the gods or even divine themselves, were the enforcers of this order. Their proclaimed connection to the divine, like the Egyptian pharaoh's duty to uphold Mat, the principle of cosmic balance, justified their immense power. This authority allowed them to collect taxes, raise armies for defense, and command vast labor forces for essential public works like irrigation canals and granaries. Political thinker Samuel Huntington argued that such political order is the bedrock of any complex society, preventing it from collapsing into chaos. This concentration of power in the hands of a few, while creating social hierarchies, provided the stability necessary for cities to undertake monumental tasks. The legal and administrative frameworks invented in and Memphis became the blueprints for Rome and eventually the modern state. Yet, law and governance were only one part of the urban glue. Another, even more powerful force was at work, weaving together the spiritual and cultural fabric of city life. The towering ziggurat was more than just a building, it was the city's beating heart. In these first great urban centers, religion was not a separate part of life. It was the very air people breathed. The temple complex was a city within a city, a hub of spiritual, economic, and social activity all at once. Priests did not simply lead prayers, they performed elaborate rituals believed to maintain the cosmic order, to ensure the annual floods would come and the harvests would be plentiful. This was a practical faith, one that promised protection and favor from the gods in a world full of uncertainties. When the community gathered for a great festival, perhaps celebrating the new year or a victorious king, they were not just worshipping, they were forging a shared identity. A farmer from the outskirts, a potter from a crowded lane, and a scribe from the temple precincts all stood together as citizens of or Memphis. This collective experience created a powerful sense of belonging that transcended family ties or profession. Archaeologist Ian Hodder notes that the symbolic artifacts found in these cities, from seals depicting gods to standardized pottery designs, consistently reflected themes of community and legitimized power. The stories carved into temple walls and recited in public squares were not mere entertainment. They were the foundational myths that explained the world and justified the social order. This cultural framework provided meaning and stability in a time of rapid, unprecedented change. It fostered an environment where new forms of expression could flourish, giving us the first great works of literature, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, and innovations in music and art that celebrated both the divine and the human experience. The cultural legacy born in these city squares and temple courtyards continues to inspire us thousands of years later. But to raise these colossal pyramids and maintain these complex societies, a hidden engine of innovation was required. What were the breakthrough technologies that powered the growth of the world's first cities? The towering ziggurat and the bustling market square were only possible because of an unseen force, the relentless engine of innovation. These first cities became hotbeds of invention, where the sheer pressure of thousands of people living together sparked solutions that would change the world. Consider the simple act of moving goods. Before the city, a person could only carry what their own strength allowed. Then, somewhere in Mesopotamia around 4,000 years ago, the wheel was adapted from the potter's craft to create the cart. Suddenly, a single farmer could transport his entire grain harvest to a central granary, fueling the urban economy. In the fields, the ard, a simple but effective early plow, was developed to cut through the tough river valley soil, turning land that was merely fertile into land that was massively productive. This agricultural revolution was underwritten by another marvel of engineering, the irrigation canal. Mesopotamian engineers designed and dug vast networks of these channels, deliberately diverting river water to fields that would otherwise be barren. This was not just digging ditches, it was a form of landscape-scale architecture that guaranteed the food surplus a city needed to survive. To build the cities themselves, builders perfected the use of mud brick, a material made from the very earth beneath their feet, baked hard in the sun. In the resource-rich Indus Valley, this drive for standardization reached an incredible level of precision. Archaeologists have found stone cubes used as weights that are so uniform across the entire civilization, from the largest city to the smallest town, that they must have been issued from a central authority. This meant a merchant in one city could trust that a weight measured in another was accurate, eliminating disputes and supercharging trade. Historian James Burke described technology not as a list of isolated gadgets, but as a network of events, each new invention connecting to and transforming others. The early urban center was the perfect node in this network, a place where the potter's wheel could inspire the cartwright, and the scribe's need for record-keeping could accelerate the development of writing. These tools did more than solve immediate problems. They created a feedback loop of progress. Better plows meant more food, which supported more specialists, who in turn developed better tools. This self-reinforcing cycle of innovation, born in the dust of the first cities, set a template that our modern tech hubs still follow today. But this concentration of people and wealth created a new and pressing vulnerability, one that would be etched directly into the urban blueprint. How did these early communities protect everything they had built from the threats outside their walls? Wealth attracts attention, and for the first cities, that attention was not always friendly. The very grain surpluses and trade goods that made urban life possible also made these settlements irresistible targets for raiders from the less settled lands beyond. The response to this new vulnerability was etched directly into the landscape, transforming the city's silhouette from a simple collection of buildings into a fortified stronghold. At Jericho, a stone wall dating back over 10,000 years stands as a stark testament to this primal need for protection. This was not a simple barrier, it was a monumental feat of engineering for its time, designed to shield the community's precious resources and its people. In Mesopotamia, this concept evolved into an art form. The walls of Uruk or were not mere lines of defense, they were powerful statements. Constructed from millions of baked mud bricks, they soared to impressive heights, punctuated by watchtowers that gave sentinels a commanding view of the surrounding plains. The gates themselves were not just openings, they were elaborate choke points, often set between massive buttresses, allowing the city to control who entered and exited. Passing through such a gate was a psychological experience, a reminder to every visitor of the power contained within. The construction of these defenses was, in itself, a monumental act of social organization. It required a central authority to coordinate thousands of laborers, to secure the necessary materials, and to feed the workers. As military historian John Keegan observed, the very need for organized defense forged stronger political structures. A ruler who could successfully protect the city from its enemies gained immense legitimacy and power, solidifying their role as a necessary leader. This cycle of threat and response also accelerated military innovation, leading to new technologies in weaponry and siegecraft that would define conflict for ages. The legacy of these early walls is all around us, from the battlements of medieval castles to the very concept of a gated community. They represent a fundamental trade-off, the sacrifice of absolute openness for the promise of collective security. And within the safety of those walls, a different kind of innovation was taking root, one that would allow these complex societies to manage themselves with unprecedented precision. This was the quiet revolution of the written word. The quiet revolution of the written word began not with poetry or prayers, but with a simple list of goods. In the bustling city of Uruk, around 3,200 years before the Common Era, a scribe pressed a reed stylus into a soft clay tablet, creating a permanent record of 5 goats, 3 sacks of barley, and a shipment of copper. This was the birth of writing, and its first purpose was purely administrative. These early cuneiform marks, a system of wedge-shaped symbols, were the gears of the urban machine, tracking the immense flow of resources that kept the city alive. Grain stores in the temple, livestock owned by the state, and goods moving along trade routes could now be counted, taxed, and managed with a precision never before possible. The scribe, trained for years in a special school called the Adaba, was the city's first data analyst. His work enabled the coordination of hundreds of laborers on a canal project, the fair distribution of rations, and the creation of legally binding contracts. This was the administrative backbone of civilization. Far to the west, along the Nile, Egyptian scribes developed their own system, the elegant and complex hieroglyphics. While often associated with grand tombs and temples, their earliest use was similarly practical, recording the annual harvest and the wealth of the pharaoh's domain. Scholar Jack Goody noted that this shift from memory to written record fundamentally changed how people thought. It allowed for the analysis of information, the comparison of records from different years, and the development of more abstract concepts in law and mathematics. A contract etched in clay created a new kind of trust, one that extended beyond a handshake and a person's lifetime. These clay tablets and papyrus scrolls were the ancient world's hard drives, the precursors to the databases and spreadsheets that manage our modern states. They underpinned the entire bureaucratic structure, turning the chaotic energy of a growing city into an organized, manageable system. But this administrative machinery, for all its logic, lacked a soul. The same hands that tallied grain stores also began to carve a different kind of message into stone, one that expressed the deepest values and beliefs of the urban world. The same hands that meticulously tallied grain stores also carved a different kind of message into stone. In the first cities, art was never just for beauty. It was a vital tool for building the world's first complex societies. A Sumerian cylinder seal, when rolled across wet clay, left behind a miniature story, a mark of ownership and authority that was difficult to forge. A towering statue of an Egyptian pharaoh, with its rigid posture and unblinking eyes, was not a portrait but a declaration of divine, unshakable power. These works were the original propaganda, broadcasting social hierarchies and religious beliefs to everyone, from the literate elite to the common laborer who could understand their meaning at a glance. Public art served as the city's collective memory. Grand murals depicting military victories or massive stone stelae inscribed with a king's laws were visual narratives that educated a diverse population and united them under a single identity. As archaeologist Colin Renfrew observed, this shared symbolic culture helped mediate social relationships, smoothing over the inevitable friction of thousands of people living in close quarters. The great myths carved into temple walls or recited in the central square gave people a common origin story and a shared purpose, turning a random gathering of individuals into a true community. This emphasis on artistic expression also drove remarkable innovation. Craftsmen experimented with new materials, perfecting the lost wax method for casting metal and grinding precious minerals to create vibrant pigments for paint. The aesthetic standards born in these urban workshops, the proportions of a statue or the motifs on a pot, would influence artistic traditions for thousands of years. The symbolic language invented to glorify a king or honor a god is the direct ancestor of the logos and public monuments that shape our modern visual landscape. Yet for all this cultural and administrative brilliance, the dense concentration of people presented a grave and silent challenge. How did these early cities protect the health of the thousands living within their walls, and what ingenious systems did they devise to manage the most basic needs of an urban population? The dense, bustling streets of the first cities brought with them a silent, invisible threat. For the first time in human history, thousands of people lived in close quarters, creating an environment where illness could spread with terrifying speed. The response to this new vulnerability was not just medical but architectural, a profound innovation in public wellness etched into the very streets. In the meticulously planned city of Mohenjo-Daro, engineers designed a complex, city-wide drainage system that was millennia ahead of its time. Each house had its own bathroom, with wastewater channeled into covered brick drains that ran beneath the main avenues. These underground channels could be accessed for cleaning, ensuring that waste was carried away from living areas, a revolutionary concept in urban health. At the heart of the city stood the Great Bath, a large, watertight pool that likely served both ritual purification and practical hygiene. This was not merely about cleanliness, it reflected a growing, collective understanding that a healthy community required deliberate, shared infrastructure. Far to the west in Mesopotamia, a different kind of health system was emerging, one recorded on clay tablets. These early medical texts document a sophisticated knowledge of herbal remedies and practical procedures. A physician might prescribe a poultice of crushed herbs for an infection, or use a bronze lancet to perform a simple surgery. While their understanding of disease was often intertwined with spiritual beliefs, their treatments were based on observation and experience, addressing everything from common fevers to more serious injuries. As historian Roy Porter observed, these urban health measures reflected a crucial shift in thinking, a move toward recognizing environmental causes of illness. They understood that stagnant water and close living conditions presented hazards that required a communal response. These ancient practices, from the Indus Valley's engineered drains to Mesopotamia's documented pharmacopoeia, were the world's first public health policies. They were essential for preventing widespread outbreaks and maintaining the productivity of the city's labor force. The legacy of this early understanding, the idea that a city must actively care for the physical well-being of its citizens, is a principle that continues to guide modern urban planning today. This accumulated knowledge of medicine, engineering, and law, however, was far too valuable to be left to chance or oral tradition. It required a system to preserve it and pass it deliberately to the next generation. The accumulated knowledge of the city was far too valuable to be lost. Within the walls of Mesopotamia, a new kind of institution emerged to safeguard it, the adaba, or tablet house. This was the world's first formal school, and its purpose was intensely practical, to train the scribes who served as the administrative backbone of civilization. A student's day was long and rigorous, spent meticulously copying cuneiform signs onto clay tablets, learning complex mathematics for surveying land and calculating interest, and studying the great literary works like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Mastering the thousands of wedge-shaped symbols required years of dedicated effort, creating a highly educated elite class of scribes, priests, and government officials. This was not education for personal enrichment, but for societal function. These trained minds were the ones who could draft a legally binding contract, record the annual grain tax, or compose a hymn to appease the gods. Across the desert in Egypt, temple schools served a similar purpose, educating priests in the precise sciences needed to maintain order. They learned astronomy to predict the Nile's life-giving flood and to align colossal monuments with the stars, medicine to tend to the royal court and the workers on state projects, and advanced architecture to design and build structures that would last for eternity. The very survival of the city's complex legal, economic, and religious systems depended on this uninterrupted transmission of specialized knowledge. As educational historian Frederick Kilger noted, the rise of literacy in these urban centers enabled the preservation and dissemination of culture on an unprecedented scale. For the first time, knowledge was no longer fleeting. It was a tangible asset that could be stored, refined, and passed deliberately from one generation to the next. The development of standardized curricula and texts created a continuous thread of learning, allowing each successive era to build upon the discoveries of the last. This systematic approach to education, born in the crowded cities of the ancient world, laid the foundational stones for our modern universities and the entire scholarly tradition. The emphasis on learning in these dense urban settings created a powerful feedback loop where concentrated minds could share, debate, and refine ideas, fueling an intellectual progress that would have been impossible in a scattered, rural world. And as these cities grew into bustling hubs of trade and administration, they began to attract a diverse array of people, setting the stage for another profound urban transformation. The streets of ancient Ur were a symphony of different tongues and traditions. In its bustling markets, a merchant from the Indus Valley might have haggled over polished carnelian beads with a local Sumerian trader, while an envoy from Anatolia discussed the price of tin. Archaeological digs have uncovered shells from the distant Indus River and lapis lazuli from the mountains of Afghanistan, buried in the soil of Mesopotamian cities. These artifacts are silent witnesses to a world already deeply interconnected. This was more than just commerce, it was a constant, living exchange. When cultures met in these urban hubs, they traded more than goods, they swapped ideas. A new method for alloying bronze learned from a foreign smith could revolutionize local toolmaking. A story about a distant god might merge with a local deity, creating a new hybrid belief. The Phoenician city of Byblos, a central node in the Mediterranean timber trade, did not just export cedar wood, it became a primary conduit for the spread of the alphabet. This revolutionary system of writing, far simpler than complex cuneiform or hieroglyphs, was eagerly adopted and adapted by the Greeks and others, fundamentally reshaping literacy and communication. As the anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss noted, it is this very diversity of cultures, this collision of different worldviews, that ignites the spark of true innovation. Cities provided the crowded, dynamic stage for this collision to happen again and again. A solution to a problem discovered in one corner of the known world could be shared, refined, and implemented in another with astonishing speed. This cross-pollination of technologies, languages, and artistic styles did not just enrich urban life, it accelerated the entire pace of human progress. The vibrant, multicultural character of a modern metropolis, where a single city block can host a dozen different cuisines and languages, is a direct legacy of these ancient urban melting pots. This incredible concentration of people and resources, however, came with a cost that the first city dwellers could not ignore. The very rivers that gave them life and the land they built upon began to bear the marks of their presence, raising profound questions about the environmental footprint of urban civilization. The very rivers that gave life to the first cities began to show the strain of sustaining them. In Mesopotamia, the intricate network of irrigation canals that fed the fields carried a hidden cost. As water evaporated under the hot sun, it left behind salts that slowly poisoned the soil. Over generations, this salinization turned once fertile fields white, causing wheat harvests to fail and forcing a shift to more salt-tolerant barley. Cuneiform tablets from the time lament the declining yields, an ancient record of an emerging environmental crisis. The demand for resources was relentless. To fire the millions of bricks needed for their towering walls and to heat their homes, cities consumed vast quantities of wood. Forests that once stood near urban centers were steadily cleared, leading to soil erosion and the loss of vital ecosystems. The city's footprint extended far beyond its walls, reshaping the very landscape that had given it birth. Yet, these early urban societies were not passive in the face of these challenges. They developed innovative responses, what we might now call the first steps toward sustainability. In different regions, farmers learned to practice crop rotation, allowing fields to recover their nutrients. Water management became more sophisticated, with systems designed to flush excess salts from the soil. Geographer Karl Butzer emphasized that these societies demonstrated a capacity for long-term adaptation, learning to read the signals of their environment and adjust their practices accordingly. The story of the first cities is not a simple tale of ecological doom, but a complex history of interaction. It shows that the tension between urban development and environmental balance is as old as civilization itself. These ancient communities were the first to grapple with a question that echoes in our modern cities. How can we build a world that does not consume the foundation upon which it stands? This delicate balance, however, was not destined to last forever. Even the greatest of these pioneering urban centers eventually faced challenges that would test their resilience to the breaking point. Even the grandest walls of Ur could not hold back the slow, creeping pressures of a changing world. The very systems that enabled these cities to flourish also contained the seeds of their vulnerability. For the great cities of the Indus Valley, like Mohenjo-Daro, a prolonged shift in climate may have been their undoing. The monsoons that fed the rivers grew weaker over centuries, and the life-giving waters that sustained their fields and flushed their brilliant drains began to retreat. In Mesopotamia, the same irrigation canals that created agricultural wealth slowly poisoned the land with salt, turning fertile fields barren and shrinking the food surplus that supported thousands. A single season of drought could trigger famine, but a century of environmental stress could unravel the entire social fabric. Historian Joseph Tainter offers a compelling lens for this process, suggesting that as societies become more complex, the energy required to maintain that complexity eventually outweighs the benefits. The bureaucratic machine, the standing army, the monumental building projects all become too costly for the strained resource base to support. When the central authority can no longer deliver security or food, people lose faith. The social contract phrase and the intricate hierarchy begins to fragment from within. This was not always a sudden, violent end. Sometimes it was a slow fading, a quiet dispersal as communities abandoned the urban center for a simpler, more sustainable life elsewhere. Yet from the ashes of these early experiments, new cities invariably rose. The knowledge of what worked and what failed was not lost. The successors to the Sumerian city-states, like the Babylonians, inherited the legal traditions but refined them, creating even more comprehensive codes like that of Hammurabi. They learned from the environmental mistakes, developing new agricultural techniques and choosing settlement locations with a deeper understanding of long-term risks. The cycle of growth and collapse is not a story of failure, but one of iterative learning. Each urban generation built upon the blueprint of the last, adapting it, reinforcing its weak points, and creating a more resilient structure. The vulnerabilities faced by Mohenjo-Daro and Ur, from resource management to social cohesion, are the same fundamental challenges our modern megacities must navigate. Their legacy is a profound lesson in balance, a reminder that the greatest threat to any civilization is often its own success, and that the blueprint for the future is always being redrawn in the lessons of the past. The blueprint for the city proved to be one of humanity's most enduring inventions. Long after the original urban centers faded, their foundational ideas embarked on a remarkable journey across time and continents. The meticulous grid of streets that defined Mohenjo-daro did not vanish with the Indus Valley civilization. Centuries later, the Greek architect Hippodamus would champion the very same gridiron plan, a system the Greeks then exported across their empire. The Romans, master engineers in their own right, adopted this organized layout for their own new cities and military camps, valuing its logical efficiency for administration and control. This ancient preference for order echoes in the straight lines of Manhattan streets and the planned blocks of countless modern suburbs. The legal principles first etched into clay tablets in Mesopotamia found an even more ambitious champion in the Babylonian king Hammurabi. His famous code, with its stated principle of an eye for an eye, was a direct descendant of earlier Sumerian law, but carved onto a towering stone stele for all to see. This concept of public, written law became a cornerstone for later judicial systems, influencing legal thought from the Eastern Mediterranean to the foundations of Western jurisprudence. Far to the west, Egyptian mastery of stone construction set a standard that mesmerized the ancient world. The precise methods for quarrying, transporting, and assembling massive blocks were studied and emulated by the Greeks, who then transferred this knowledge to the Romans. The legacy of these techniques can be traced through the monumental architecture of subsequent empires, a continuous thread of engineering knowledge. Historian Lewis Mumford beautifully described the city as a special kind of container, one that allowed culture to not only be created but also stored and concentrated over generations. The medieval town, with its protective walls and central market square, the Renaissance city, with its renewed focus on public spaces and grand avenues, and even the modern metropolis, with its zones for commerce and residence, all draw from this ancient well of urban design. The true power of these original blueprints lies in their incredible adaptability. They provided a foundational grammar for urban life that could be translated into 1,000 different local dialects, shaped by unique environments and cultures. This raises a compelling question: if these urban models shared so many core ideas, what made each of them truly distinct? How did the unique character of a Sumerian city-state differ from that of an Egyptian administrative capital or an Indus Valley metropolis? The towering ziggurats of Mesopotamia and the gridded streets of the Indus Valley tell two very different stories of urban life. In Mesopotamia, the city was a theocratic fortress. Its heart was the temple complex, a sprawling institution that controlled vast farmlands, stored surplus grain, and managed trade. This centralized religious authority created a steep social pyramid, with a king and priestly elite at the apex, overseeing a society defined by hierarchy and documented by thousands of administrative cuneiform tablets. Their cities were encircled by imposing defensive walls, a testament to a world of competition and conflict. Life here was organized vertically, with power flowing from the top down. Journey to the Indus Valley, however, and you find a strikingly different blueprint. Cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa present a puzzle to archaeologists. They reveal an astonishing emphasis on standardization, from uniform brick sizes to identical weights and measures across a vast region. Their most celebrated innovation was not a temple, but a city-wide drainage system that served every home, suggesting a profound communal investment in public health. Unlike the monumental palaces and tombs of Mesopotamia or Egypt, no single, overly extravagant ruler's residence has been found. the layout feels more egalitarian, focused on collective well-being and practical order rather than glorifying a single individual. Then there was Egypt, a world unto itself. Egyptian cities like Memphis were deeply integrated into the cosmic order. The pharaoh was not just a king, he was a living god, the earthly embodiment of the deity Horus. This divine kingship meant the city was an extension of the palace and the temple, all functioning as one administrative machine to serve the god-king and ensure the continued flow of the Nile's bounty. Monumental architecture was directed toward tombs and temples for the afterlife, creating a landscape of eternal order rather than the bustling, commercial cities of Mesopotamia. As archaeologist Bruce Trigger observed, these variations are a powerful lesson in human adaptability. The same basic idea, the city, was molded by unique environments, resources, and spiritual beliefs into three distinct models of civilization. This diversity reminds us that there has never been one single path to urban life, but within these grand architectural and social structures, a more intimate human story was unfolding. How did the rise of the city reshape the most fundamental unit of society, the family, and what new roles did women find within these complex new worlds? The grand walls and temples of the city were not just monuments of stone, but frameworks that reshaped the most intimate aspects of human life, the family itself. Inside the crowded households of Sumer, a woman could be found managing a bustling tavern or a textile workshop, her seal used to authorize business contracts just like a man's. She could own her own land and pass it on to her children. In the highest echelons of society, a woman serving as a high priestess held immense religious and economic influence, managing the vast holdings of a temple. Yet her counterpart, a poor laborer's wife, faced a life of relentless toil with far fewer legal protections. Status was often dictated more by class than by gender alone. Along the Nile, Egyptian women experienced a remarkable degree of legal autonomy for the ancient world. A wife could initiate a divorce and was entitled to a share of the marital property if it was granted. She could inherit wealth, bring cases before a court, and oversee her own financial affairs. This relative equality in legal matters stood in stark contrast to many other contemporary cultures. The structure of the family itself was adapting to the pressures and possibilities of urban density. The nuclear family, a smaller household of parents and their children, became a more practical unit within the tight confines of a city dwelling. Yet the old ways persisted, with extended kinship networks of cousins, aunts, and uncles remaining a crucial safety net, providing support in times of illness or economic hardship. As historian Gerda Lerner noted, the shift to urban life was a double-edged sword for women. It introduced new legal restrictions and social expectations in some areas, yet it also carved out unprecedented avenues for economic independence and public influence in others. The diversity of these ancient experiences shatters any single narrative, revealing that the path of gender relations was never a straight line. These early urban societies were setting precedents that would ripple through the centuries, establishing patterns of family life and legal rights whose echoes we still feel today. To manage the complex rhythms of this new urban world, from planting seasons to religious festivals, city dwellers needed to master a force even greater than the river. They needed to measure time itself by turning their eyes to the heavens. The rhythm of the city demanded a new relationship with time itself. For the first farmers, the seasons were a matter of survival, but for the vast urban populations they now fed, timing became a science of absolute precision. In the temple courtyards of Mesopotamia, priests with sharpened reeds and clay tablets meticulously tracked the phases of the moon. They noted its slow dance across the night sky, marking the passage of days and the birth of each new lunar cycle. This careful observation gave rise to one of humanity's first great organizational tools, the lunar calendar. It was this calendar that told the community when to sow their seeds for the spring barley harvest and when to gather for the great New Year festival, aligning the entire city's labor and worship with the cosmos. Far to the west, along the Nile, Egyptian astronomer priests faced a different celestial challenge. Their lives depended not on the moon, but on the sun and the star they called Sopdet, which we know as Sirius. They observed that the heliacal rising of Sirius, its first appearance in the dawn sky just before the sun, coincided almost perfectly with the annual, life-giving flood of the Nile. This celestial signal was so reliable that the Egyptians built their entire civil administration around a new concept: a 365-day solar calendar divided into 12 months of 30 days each, with 5 extra days added for festivals. This was a monumental leap in accuracy, allowing the pharaoh's officials to predict the flood, schedule the planting of vast fields, and coordinate the labor of thousands of workers with breathtaking efficiency. As historian of science James Evans notes, it was the stability and concentrated resources of the urban center that made such sustained, generational observation possible. Temples became the world's first observatories and data centers, their walls and tablets storing celestial knowledge that guided not just farmers, but also merchants planning long-distance trade routes and navigators steering by the stars. The very structure of our modern week, with its 7 days, finds its origin in the 7 celestial bodies observed by Babylonian astrologers. These ancient urban timekeeping systems are the direct ancestors of the calendar on your phone and the global positioning satellites that guide you today. They remind us that some of our most abstract sciences were born from the intensely practical needs of the first city dwellers to synchronize their complex world. And just as the stars provided a rhythm for work and ritual, another art form emerged to give that rhythm a voice and a beat, weaving together the emotional fabric of urban life through music and performance. The silence of an ancient city was a myth. Its soundscape was rich with the rhythmic beat of a drum from a temple courtyard and the delicate pluck of a lyre's strings drifting from an open window. In the great cities of Sumer, music was woven into the fabric of existence. Elaborate lyres, some with bulls' heads carved from gold and lapis lazuli, were buried with their owners not as mere possessions, but as essential companions for the journey into the afterlife. This tells us that music was considered a power that transcended the world of the living. In Egypt, the harp's melodies were believed to soothe the gods and ensure cosmic balance. When a community gathered for a grand procession, the air would have been filled with the sounds of sistrums rattling, flutes piping, and a chorus of voices raised in a hymn to a city's patron deity. These were not just concerts, they were collective acts of faith that unified the population. As ethnomusicologist John Blacking suggested, this shared musical experience was a powerful force for social bonding. In a dense, diverse urban setting where people from different backgrounds lived side by side, a familiar song or a traditional dance became a touchstone of shared identity. The stories told in these performances were the hard drives of their time, encoding moral lessons, historical triumphs, and the very laws of the land into memorable verse and movement. A performance in the public square could communicate a new royal decree or reinforce a social value far more effectively than a written notice few could read. This drive to preserve and perfect these complex performances led to another urban innovation, the development of early musical notation. Cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia contain carefully written instructions for tuning a harp and for playing specific melodies, allowing musical traditions to be standardized and passed down through generations with newfound accuracy. The soundscape of the early city, from the solemn temple hymn to the lively tavern song, did more than provide entertainment. It created a resonant layer of cultural memory that helped civilization endure. But when the music faded and the rituals were complete, the people of these cities still sought other forms of engagement, turning to games of chance and skill that connected them to each other and to their own humanity. The clatter of dice on a stone board was a familiar sound in the ancient world. From the royal tombs of Ur to a humble Egyptian home, people gathered around games like Senet, a contest of strategy and chance that was much more than a simple pastime. The beautifully crafted board found in Tutankhamun's tomb, made of ebony and ivory, shows how deeply these games were woven into the culture. They were tests of wit and reflections of belief, with the path of the game pieces sometimes seen as a symbolic journey through the underworld. In the public squares, a different kind of energy took over. Courtyards and open spaces hosted athletic contests, communal dances, and vibrant festivals that offered a necessary release from the daily grind of urban labor. These gatherings were vital social glue. A merchant and a potter might find themselves side by side, cheering on the same wrestler or moving in unison during a harvest dance, momentarily dissolving the rigid lines of social class. As archaeologist Stephen Mithen notes, the line between play and ritual was often blurred. A dance could be both a joyous celebration and a sacred act to ensure a good harvest. These shared experiences transmitted cultural values from one generation to the next, teaching stories and skills in an engaging, memorable way. The human need for balance, for joy and connection outside of work, is a thread that runs unbroken from the first city squares to our modern parks and stadiums. The legacy of the royal game of Ur lives on in every board game we play today, a testament to our timeless desire for play. This focus on community life, however, extended even to how these early urban societies honored those who had passed on, creating resting places that reflected their deepest beliefs about life and what might lie beyond. The grand tombs of Ur were not monuments of silence but of profound belief. Deep within the royal cemetery, archaeologists uncovered a vision of the afterlife that mirrored the social world of the living city. A king or queen was laid to rest not alone, but surrounded by a full retinue of attendants, from soldiers and musicians to ox cart drivers, all of whom had voluntarily taken a sacred potion to accompany their ruler into eternity. This practice reveals a powerful conviction that status and social structure continued beyond death, requiring the same hierarchy in the next life. The sheer wealth of goods buried with them, from intricate gold headdresses to beautifully crafted lyres, were provisions for an aristocratic afterlife, tangible proof of a belief that the soul's journey demanded material support. Far to the west along the Nile, this concept was engineered on a colossal scale. The Egyptian mastaba, a low rectangular tomb, evolved into the towering step pyramid and then the true pyramid, a perfect geometric mountain pointing toward the heavens. These were not just tombs, they were resurrection machines, designed with intricate passages and chambers stocked with everything from food and furniture to shabby dolls, small figurines intended to perform labor for the deceased in the afterlife. The Great Pyramid of Giza required the coordinated labor of thousands of workers for decades, a staggering investment that reinforced the pharaoh's divine role as the guarantor of cosmic order. Anthropologist Robert Hertz theorized that such elaborate funeral rites serve a dual purpose for the living. They provide a structured way for a community to process the profound disruption of a loss, and in doing so, they powerfully reaffirm the existing social order. The public spectacle of a royal burial or the quiet family gathering at a mastaba reminded everyone of their place in the hierarchy, both in this world and the next. These concentrated urban cemeteries, located just beyond the city walls, became permanent landscapes of memory. They were constant physical reminders of a shared ancestry and a collective identity, connecting the living community to those who had built the city before them. The way a society cares for its dead offers a clear window into its deepest values. These ancient traditions, from the tomb goods of Ur to the pyramid texts of Egypt, established patterns of commemoration that would influence later urban planning, from the grand necropolises of Rome to our modern civic cemeteries. They show us that the city was always a place for both the living and the memory of those who passed. This close connection between the urban and the natural world extended to the other beings that shared these spaces, creatures whose roles were far more complex than mere companionship. The streets of an early city were never a purely human space. They echoed with the lowing of cattle being driven to a central yard, the bleating of sheep brought in for shearing, and the protective presence of dogs guarding a household's entrance. These animals were not just visitors, they were essential, living components of the urban machine. In Mesopotamia, the strength of oxen was harnessed to pull the plows that broke the tough river valley soil, turning vast tracts of land into productive fields. Their manure enriched the soil, and their bodies provided meat, leather, and bone for tools. Flocks of sheep and goats were walking commodities, their wool and hair the raw materials for a thriving textile industry that fueled long-distance trade. This was a relationship of profound utility, a partnership that powered the agricultural and economic engines of the first civilizations. Far to the west, in Egypt, the relationship took on a deeply spiritual dimension. The cat, which likely began its association with humans by controlling vermin in grain stores, became revered as a sacred vessel of the goddess Bastet. To harm one was a serious offense. This was more than simple pest control. It was a symbolic fusion where an animal's practical role was elevated into a divine connection, intertwining the fate of the city with the favor of the gods. Do archaeologists who study animal remains from ancient sites find evidence of this complex coexistence in broken bones and discarded shells? Their analysis reveals that urban diets were surprisingly varied, incorporating fish from the rivers, wild game from the surrounding plains, and the meat from domesticated herds, providing the protein needed to sustain a concentrated, laboring population. As historian Juliet Clutton-Brock highlighted, the act of domestication created a new, irreversible bond. Humans provided protection and food, and in return, animals offered their labor, their products, and eventually, in the case of creatures like the dog and cat, their companionship. This dependency shaped the very rhythm of urban life, from the farmer's daily routine to the long-range plans of a merchant. Yet this intimate coexistence was not without its difficulties. Concentrating large numbers of animals and people in close quarters created new vulnerabilities. The risk of disease transmission from animal to human was a constant, unseen threat, and the management of animal waste required constant attention to maintain public health. The very presence of animals within the city walls demanded adaptations in architecture and daily habit, a continuous negotiation between the human world and the natural one it sought to contain. This ancient integration reminds us that our modern cities, with their parks and pets, are still navigating this age-old relationship. The philosophical questions raised by this shared existence were profound, forcing the first city dwellers to contemplate their place in a world they were actively reshaping. The crowded city streets forced a new kind of thinking, a turning inward to contemplate the soul. As scribes recorded laws and trade deals, they also began to write down questions that had no simple answer. In the world's first great epic, the story of Gilgamesh, we hear a king's tormented cry against his own mortality. His journey is not for treasure, but for wisdom, a search for meaning in the face of loss and the inevitability of death. This was more than a story. It was a profound philosophical exploration born from the urban experience, where leaders wielded immense power and had to ponder its responsible use. Along the Nile, this reflection took a more practical form. Egyptian wisdom literature, like the teachings of Ptahhotep, offered clear advice for living a good life within a complex society. It instructed young men on how to behave humbly before their superiors, to speak truthfully, and to care for their families. This was an early ethical system, a guide for moral conduct designed to maintain harmony in a densely populated world where every action rippled through the community. The German philosopher Karl Jaspers saw this era as a pivotal turning point for humanity, which he called the Axial Age. From Mesopotamia to India and China, the first cities became the stages for a parallel awakening. In these bustling hubs, the constant interaction of different people, the visibility of injustice, and the concentration of power forced thinkers to ask fundamental questions. What is a just ruler? What is our duty to our neighbor? How should we live when life is so clearly finite? The answers varied, but the questions themselves were a revolutionary development. The urban center, with its scribble schools and temples, provided the stable environment where these ideas could be written down, debated, and refined over generations. The ethical inquiries that began in the courtyards of Sumer and the scriptoriums of Egypt would eventually influence Greek philosophy, Hebrew prophecy, and the moral foundations of countless future societies. This legacy shows us that the city was never just a collection of buildings. It was the cradle of the examined life, the blueprint for modern society. From its grid-like streets to its legal codes, finds its deepest roots in these first urban experiments. The ancient choice to settle, to build walls and temples, to specialize labor and record transactions, set in motion a chain of events that leads directly to our globalized world. The challenges they faced, from environmental strain to social inequality, are the very same challenges we navigate today. Their story is not a distant relic, but a persistent echo. It reminds us that every city is a living argument about how humans can best live together, a continuous project started thousands of years ago on the fertile banks of a river, and one we are all still building. The blueprint of the first cities was ultimately a vision for human collaboration. It was a set of instructions for how thousands of strangers could learn to live and work together, transforming the very nature of society. From the river valleys of Mesopotamia to the orderly streets of the Indus and the divine order of the Nile, these early urban centers gave us the tools we still use to build our world. They invented writing to record our agreements, law to mediate our disputes, and governance to coordinate our collective efforts. They fostered the arts to express our shared identity and the sciences to understand our place in the cosmos. The legacy of Ur and Mohenjo-Daro is not locked in the past. It is alive in every city block, every legal contract, and every line of code in our modern digital networks. As we navigate our own era of rapid urbanization, environmental pressures, and social change, their story offers a powerful lesson. Cities are not static places, but dynamic processes, constantly being rebuilt by human creativity and our enduring capacity to adapt. The challenges of sustainability and equity that we face today are the same fundamental tests of balance those first city dwellers confronted. Their experience reminds us that the most resilient cities are those that invest in the well-being of all their inhabitants and respect the natural systems that support them. This ancient legacy is a gift of possibility, a reminder that we are all participants in the ongoing project of civilization. We carry this blueprint forward, tasked with building communities that honor our shared heritage while thoughtfully shaping our future potential. If this journey into the origins of our urban world resonated with you, please share your reflections in the comments below. Your support through likes and subscriptions helps bring more of these stories to light. Thank you for watching.